We are listening right now to the New York Times daily podcast, which I never listen to. I'm not a huge fan of the New York Times. And we're listening to it because I like to hear both sides of the story, even though we know that this is going to be obviously a very pro Blake Lively podcast, because it was the New York Times article that coincided with Blake Lively's CRD complaint, which set off everything in motion. About a 30-minute drive, Dylan and I, my son who's filming, and we will be listening to it. And he will be recording some of my reactions. Number one, the person being interviewed is Megan Twohey, who wrote the article. And the one thing I do notice, just in the journalistic way that they're recording this podcast, is the music. They always have like the background music, and that's an important part of this because music tells a story, and it kind of like dictates the way that you tell the story and the way that the audience is supposed to feel. So the way that they're introducing Baldoni into the story is they're talking about his past and like his TED Talk. So they play the part of his TED Talk, which was recorded about 10 years ago, and it's about like, are you man enough to stand forward to a woman when they say me too? And it's pulling like clips from his podcast, but the music in the background is kind of like this cheesy clown music, like do 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 do, which is telling the story almost like ridiculing him. It's just interesting. So now they're going through Blake Lively's complaints. They talk about the fact that when they start filming, Justin comes into her dressing room when she is breastfeeding. So does Jamie Heath. He walks into the room when she's breastfeeding, when she is getting body makeup taken off and her top is off. They're talking about porn. I mean, the list goes on and on. So much so that the person interviewing goes, whoa, wow. And my son, my 12-year-old son goes, whoa. It's clearly said in a very, very like dramatic bam, bam, bam way. There's no music in the background. There is no like do, 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 the way that they were doing it when they were talking about Justin. So of course I'm not even, halfway through the podcast, so I don't even know if they're getting to the point where he retaliates, but the way that they're telling the story, they're completely skipping through so much of it, because what they're saying is Blake Lively raised these concerns. Blake Lively asked Wayfarer, I want an intimacy coordinator with me at all times of the movie. Wayfarer has no idea why they're raising these concerns, but wants to appease Blake Lively, wants everyone to feel safe, and signs off on it. Everything is handled, and problem is identified, and problem is solved. There is no more issues of misconduct on set. But the next issue is that there's 2 edits of the movie, and Sony just happens to choose Blake's. It's like skipping over the entire part of the fact that Blake completely took over creative control and like steered Justin away from his movie. She's like forgetting the entire drama, but let's see the rest of the podcast. Okay, so now they're explaining how Justin Baldoni was worried that they were going to have negative press against him, and people were starting to talk about the fact that people were unfollowing him, and so he hired Melissa Nathan and brought on the crisis PR. But this is so interesting because they're saying that Melissa Nathan had presented him with this proposal of how they were going to handle negative crisis, negative PR, and how they were going to go about it. And then they say, well, Justin Baldoni was writing text messages, clearly getting concerned that it wasn't going to be done. And the interviewer goes, well, I think the audience needs to know, can we read some of those text messages? Yes, let's read some of those text messages, as if like this hasn't been planned by the New York Times to really like go deep into Justin Baldoni in every possible negative way. Like every possible negative way that they can make Justin Baldoni sound, they find a way here. This is so wild. So now what we're at the point is like we're reiterating that this campaign to take Lively down, and what we just paused on was the most important part here is that Baldoni made sure that all of this was, and I'm using their words, untraceable. And then the music starts. Do, 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 do. It's giving Serial. It's giving possibly a murder, true crime podcast. So now we're moving on into the promo of everything and how Blake Lively is doing it more into like the florals. She's leaning into the florals, grab your florals, get your girls, and talking about her booze and how everything is like going really wrong and she's not focusing on the real important subjects. But instead of saying that she is doing the wrong thing for the tone of the movie, they're not saying that. They're saying it was received wrong, which is very strange considering how Baldoni's team was hired to run this smear campaign. It's tending to look a little strange that it was received wrong in the press. Like, they're making it sound like Blake Lively did nothing wrong, but the audience perceived it wrong. This is the most biased podcast. I am in shock. This is essentially the article in podcast form. I mean, what did we expect? It's the New York Times. All right, I'm going to put myself through more of this. I'm going to say something, and this is a side note. Megan Twohey, you got to, like, blow your nose. The entire podcast, she's going, she's sniffling the entire time, and I'm losing my mind. But that's just my own personal issue. Secondly, the interviewer just asked her a very important question. She goes, do we know how much of this negative backlash that was going out against Blake Lively, do we know how much of it was organic audience feeling, like people like us, or how much of it was actually seeded by these PR people? And Megan goes, I don't actually know. No one actually knows. There's no proof of any of it being purposely put in. There you go. Here's something interesting. They've talked about the entire complaint in about like 25 minutes. And they talked about all the text messages between Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel, even though they know that these text messages have been edited. They know that they've been changed up. They know that they're reading them out of context and that they're reading impartial or incomplete text messages. But they've already told the story. They're completely telling a false story here. Now they're talking about how 14 hours were given, even though, and the interviewer, who's acting like she doesn't know the story at all, is like, yes, that's very standard operating procedures. Oh, okay. This is like so ridiculous. Standard operating procedures, she's saying. And then now they're saying that Justin Baldoni came back immediately with a lawsuit against the New York Times. And now we're explaining Justin Baldoni's side. Okay, it looks like they also got an official statement from the New York Times.
For listeners, that before this interview, the team at the Daily got an official statement on this lawsuit from the New York Times company. It says that the Times stands by the story, saying it was meticulously and responsibly reported, and that the company plans to, quote, vigorously defend against the suit.
Okay, now I'm at Starbucks, and I'm just waiting for my coffee, and I'm listening to the end of the show, and I listen to this. This is so manipulating.
As I've watched all this unfold, I keep thinking of an exchange that was actually cited in Lively's legal complaint between two of Baldoni's publicists. One of the publicists wrote, quote, "So are we in the clear now? Did we survive?" And Melissa Nathan responded, "We survived. All press is so overwhelming. We've confused people. So much mixed messaging. It's actually really funny if you think about it."
Okay, so the interviewer asks Megan at the end of it, saying, what do you think your takeaway is? And she goes, what I took away from this, and remember, this is the woman that exposed Harvey Weinstein. So she goes, what I took away from this was the fact that at the end of this, I got so many people from, especially from Hollywood, saying, I had no idea this existed. All of these text messages, I had no idea that this kind of experience existed. That basically so many people could go to such lengths to protect their reputation and take other people down. Okay. Wow. What she is totally, completely overriding in this story, this is so incredibly irresponsible. The New York Times Daily, shockingly and irresponsibly, has one of the top podcasts. This is the most dangerous thing here, because the New York Times is a biased reporter. It is not like, you cannot look at the New York Times and think that you're reading news. I understand that like Joe Rogan and all of those top podcasts are also biased, but they don't report as news. The New York Times is not news. It's not. It's an opinion piece. I don't look at the New York Times as news. There's so much in it that's not true. It's been sued. They've been sued before. They are not to be trusted, and I believe that they are spreading misinformation here. Nothing that they're saying is factual, and they're being sued for it. And so anything that you're hearing on the New York Times Daily podcast should be taken as opinion. And this is just double downing on this lawsuit, and now will be included, I imagine. And if I were Brian Friedman, I would double down on going on another talk show to expose this disgusting podcast. I'm sorry. Team Blake Lively or not, the fact that they release this now in a podcast to expose it to now the audio side